This is John Jackman's journal. He was a soldier with the 9th Kentucky Infantry. This part features a nighttime battle. Let's begin. January 1st, 1865. Divine service in camp by the Reverend Mr. Daly of Marshallville. Very pleasant weather. January 2nd, pleasant again today. Riding, seated on the sunny side of the house, nearly all the boys gone to Perry, 8 miles off, to a party given especially for their benefit. Roll call ordered. January 3rd, raining, cold. January 5th, wrote to Mrs. R. and Mr. McFeely, cool, clear. Late afternoon received orders to rejoin the brigade at Augusta, Georgia. January 6th, set in raining last night. This morning damp, cold. We shall start for Augusta in the morning. All the boys out bidding their sweethearts goodbye. January 7th. A little after daylight, we took up our line of march. The dismounted men, over 100, took the train at Fort Valley for Macon. The wagon train and the men with horses moved by the direct dirt road — there are no pikes in the South — for the same place. A great many have to lead their horses and few have saddles. All the wagons of the brigade are along, being quite a train. We also have a drove of cattle with us. I am mounted on Sorghum P.'s pony, a little scrub of a thing, my feet nearly dragging the ground when on his back. When we started this morning it was very cold, a cutting wind blowing. The colonel stopped in Fort Valley to draw rations, and a great many of the boys drew too much skimmins. After the column had moved on, I was back, trying to get some of the boys off. Lieutenant Buchanan had more than anyone else. As we were riding out of town, Buchanan started his horse in a run and collided with Snodder. Both horses and riders went down in a pile, and I thought Lieutenant Buchanan was killed. But neither horses nor riders were badly hurt. We marched 20 miles and camped, put up a fly at night, and made a log heap in front, slept magnificently. January 8th, a raw, disagreeable day. 12 miles brought us to Macon. We crossed the Ocmulgee and found the dismounted men camped on its banks below the city, nearly night before the wagons got ferried over. January 9th, had to wait until 11 o'clock before we got forage over the river, have 5 days' forage on wagons. P having come up, I turned Sorghum over to him, and without much regret, for Sorghum trots very hard. Pete and I footed it 6 miles towards Milledgeville through a cold rain. When we stopped to camp, soon got our fly pitched and a fire made. Cooked supper, rain poured down all night. Slept well. January 10th. At daylight, loaded up and moved out. I thought I would walk a while. Had not been on the road long before it commenced thundering, and soon after the heaviest shower of rain fell I ever saw. Got drenched to the skin. 3 miles brought us to Griswoldville, which is nearly all in ashes. The colonel told me to ride in his wagon, which had a cover. Raining until afternoon, in the wagon all day. We passed the battlefield near Griswoldville, which evidences quite a fight. We passed through Gordon, where the Milledgeville road junctions with the Central, which runs from Macon to Savannah, late afternoon, and are camped 6 miles from the place, towards Milledgeville. We have traveled 16 miles today. The dismounted men have to march. Our fly is in a pleasant place. We have had a good supper. The night is pleasant, being clear. A fire blazes before us, and we are enjoying ourselves as best we can. The judge is making speeches on the war. So is Captain B, or the Old Guard, as we sometimes call him. Dr. G and Booker R are singing Kitty Wells and the Vacant Chair, and I have just finished writing my notes of the day. Expect to sleep well. January 11th, up hour and a half before day. Started at 7 o'clock. Cloudy most of the day, a cold wind blowing. Marched, mostly in the wagon today. 14 miles brought us to Milledgeville, and we camped 1/2 mile west of town. The Oconee River is so high the pontoon bridge is taken up. We may have to stay here several days. We got to camp at 2 p.m. and put up a fly. As we have been recruited by some boys that we left behind, GP, the judge, Booker R., and myself, all of the same company, have put up a fly to ourselves. Wood scarce. January 12th, weather more moderate today, lying about in the sunshine, reading Love After Marriage. Took a bath this morning, and as all the snow was not yet melted off, quite a cold operation. Wagon sent back to Gordon for rations. Have a good deal of laugh at the expense of Trojan, the judge's old horse. He had but one eye, and Black John says he saw 2 buzzards today playing 7-up, which should have the eye. Poor old Trojan. He seems on the brink of the grave. No doubt his bones will be left to whiten the roadside somewhere between here and Augusta. GP and I sleep together. Sleep cold, too. A moonlight night, January 13th. The judge and I went into Milledgeville this morning, visited the State House, which we found all topsy-turvy. The desks overturned, the archives scattered over the floor, some places the papers being on the floor a foot deep. This was done by Sherman's men. There are some splendid portraits in the Representative Hall and in the Senate Chamber, which are in statu quo. The arsenal, standing in the State House yard, was burned. We also visited the penitentiary, which was also burned by Sherman's army. With the exception of the arsenal and penitentiary, and perhaps a little fencing, we could see no further indications of the destruction of property about the town. The railroad depot is in ashes, and a bridge across a slough burned. We passed through the cemetery and saw a fine monument to the memory of a Mr. Jordan. The country between here and Macon is not as much torn up as I had expected to see. With the exception of 1 or 2 houses, only fences were burned. Griswoldville was the worst served, a large factory for making pistols being destroyed. I saw no dwellings burned in the village. That is no signs of any having been burned, rather. Our bread gave out this morning, having nothing but rice for breakfast. For dinner, we had the addition of baked sweet potatoes bought in the country, January 14th. Clear and cold all day. Had beef and sweet potatoes for breakfast. Had, as Lieutenant Buchanan says, nothing for dinner. Reading Love After Marriage by Mrs. Lee Hughes. Rations came late at night, and we cooked dinner. The crows were cawing about today as though spring were coming soon. Slept cold at night. The judge and Booker R. kept up a quarreling all night about the blankets. January 15th. Went to Presbyterian Church. Heard good music. A moderate sermon. Saw many pretty ladies. The ladies are all that redeems the place. The town is the most ordinary place I ever saw, and in the most sterile country, has 2,000 or 3,000 inhabitants from appearance. Pleasant evening, helping to get wood. The boys occasionally go out deserter hunting. Lieutenant Buchanan, with a party of 30 men, captured 7 one day. When a party gets after them, Lieutenant Buchanan says their families have a way of telegraphing all over the country by means of blowing horns. He said he could hear horns tooting all over the neighborhood. Went to town at night, no church. While returning in company with the doctor, Judge Booker R., etc., saw a sight. January 16th, cool, cloudy morning. GP, as courier, started for the brigade this morning at 10 o'clock. The old guard and I shall sleep together, shall move tomorrow at 8 a.m., January 17th. So cold last night, did not sleep much. The judge and Booker R. fussing all night about cover. Started at 8 a.m., crossed the Oconee on pontoon bridge. By 3 p.m., we had marched 11 miles when we camped in a pine woods, which soon got on fire and was some trouble to put out. I rode in a wagon nearly all day. One of my ankles is very much swollen. The boys say I am taking scratches, being among horses with that disease. So much. The country we passed through today not torn up much. Had a good supper of beefsteak, etc. Sun warm in the evening, wind cool, slept well, put up our fly. January 18th, started at daylight. 12 miles brought us to Sparta, a nice little town. The country we have traveled through today looks better, more fertile. Besides, there have been no raids through it. In town, I got out of the wagon to wait for the judge, doctor, and Yontees. I wished to see them pass through town with their stock. They had straggled far behind, but presently the judge hove in sight. Trojan following at his heels with a big roll of blankets around his neck. Also, the judge's haversack dangling from his mane. Trojan's back is too sore for the judge to ride him. Next came the doctor with Edward the Black Prince following. Edward the Black Prince also has a sore back and is a pretty good match for Trojan. Immediately after came Yontees, followed by Wild Bill of the Woods, with a bundle of rags as large as a barrel tied around his sore foot scratches. We had a good laugh over the grand procession, camped 3 miles from town, had sweet potatoes, etc., for supper. Bishop Pierce called at headquarters to see Parson Kavanaugh, nephew of Bishop Kavanaugh, and chaplain of 6th Kentucky. There is no danger of the parson's dying for having too much sense, and Captain E says that the bishop's calling to see the parson is something like the sentiment in the song, "Let me kiss him for his mother." January 19th. Started early and have made it to Warrenton, 18 miles. Camped 1/2 mile west of town. Just as we got our fly pitched, rain commenced about 1 p.m. We had turnip soup, etc., for supper. We passed Mayfield, the terminus of the railroad at present, which is intended to run to Milledgeville. Mayfield is nothing more than a station. The country passed through today looked very well, yet there were too many pine trees. The frogs in the swamps keep up a terrible croaking. Slept pretty well. January 20th. Moved out at 8 a.m. Warrenton looked about the same as when I was there last September. Has been raining all day. Walked nearly all the time. Have come 15 miles and are now camped 3 miles south of Thompson at an old schoolhouse. Thompson is a little town on the State Road, or Georgia Railroad, about 40 miles from Augusta. Stopped raining, and we got supper, had turnips, sweet potatoes, etc. The judge, doctor, and Yontees, again straggling behind. We ate the supper up from them. They got in just as we were winding up. When the judge got in sight of us eating, he said, "Just in time." But he was a little too late. Raining all night. Our fly leaked, and I did not sleep well. January 21st. Raining until noon. Lying over for rations to be brought up by rail. Would have been a bad day for marching. Got some straw in the evening to sleep on. Would have had a good dinner, but we had no salt to season the victuals. Did not sleep well, though on a good straw bed. My head hurting me. January 22nd. Started at 8 a.m. The next station below, all the dismounted men took cars for Augusta. I preferred staying with the wagons. Raining all day. Rode in the wagon all the time. Came 19 miles. At Warrenton, some of the men mutinied, declaring that they would take the cars against the orders of the colonel. This morning he had the leaders arrested and is making them walk under a mounted guard. Slept well. Raining at night. January 23rd. When we started, I got in a wagon and rode a while, but Pete and I concluded to walk ahead of the train. We got to Augusta some time before the train got in, as the roads were bad. I saw Colonel Hunt and Dr. Gibson. Received a letter from home. dated October 18th, 1864. The city has just been flooded from the Savannah River and is the muddiest place I ever saw. Boats floated on the highest streets, camped 2 miles out on the Waynesboro Road, have come over 17 miles today, January 24th, have moved 10 miles towards Waynesboro. Pleasant day, camp in a nice place, January 25th. Several mounted men started for the brigade this morning down at Briar Creek. A cold, cloudy day. Have come 20 miles today, camped 1/4 of a mile from Waynesboro, walked nearly all the way, am worn out, head aching. Hard-looking country we have come through today. Waynesboro is a most desolate, woebegone-looking place I have seen for some time. Some of the buildings were burned by the Federals. Wheeler had a fight with Kilpatrick here not long since. January 26th, cold last night, slept well. This evening, Booker R., the judge, and Yontes killed a bear, and at night, T and the doctor went out and foraged for a sack of sweet potatoes. Fresh pork or bear and sweet potatoes will do very well to live on. January 27th. Evening, the judge and I went into town. The courthouse very much torn up. A fine building and well furnished. Cold at night. January 28th. Moved back across Briar Creek, which is 4 miles from town, and camped about 2 miles from Green's Cut on the railroad. Have good wood, but the water is not very handy. Our fly is well pitched, and we have a good bed of broom sage. January 29th, and have been sick all day, have been living too high lately. January 30th. Pleasant day, feel better. A part of Hood's army came down on the cars last night and kept a powerful fuss. Tonight I hear a violin squeaking over the way. Music hath charms to soothe the savage breast. January 31st. Late at night, orders came in for the wagon train to join the brigade at Mill Haven at once. The dismounted men to be left to guard Ray's Bridge 2 miles from here. All the horses are also ordered up, so the judge and Trojan will have to go. I shall go with them, as I wish to see the regiment. February 1st. Cold in the morning, but as the day advanced, got pretty hot. Started at daylight for Mill Haven, 28 miles distant. As the wagons were heavily loaded and the roads bad, I rode, barebacked, on V's old horse. The judge, Yonti, and myself traveled together. The country passed through, covered with pines, thickly settled. Just as the sun was setting, we got to the brigade. I had not been with the regiment before since last June. Was glad to see the boys. They liked the cavalry very much. At night, the brigade had a battle with the Milish, camped close by, using lighted pine burrs, or cones, for missiles. The boys charged the Milish out of their camp and sacked it. They got hats, coats, saddle blankets, etc. The battle lasted for some time and presented a beautiful sight. At times the air would be full of the blazing missiles, burning like turpentine balls. Tired and slept well. February 2nd. Pleasant day. Wrote home by flag of truce. The judge and I are messing together, talking over old times with the boys. Lieutenant W., adjutant, will get me a horse. February 3rd. The brigade moved for Sylvania across Briar Creek this morning. The judge started with Trojan, but Colonel Wycliffe turned him back. Colonel Wycliffe came down to stay with the regiment, but General Lewis has ordered all the dismounted men down here, and Colonel Wycliffe is to still be in command. The judge and I took Coleman of Company H into our mess, a disabled man in the arm. We have for housekeeping 1 canteen, 1 little tin bucket, and 1 round gourd. We have to borrow from the colonel a skillet to cook bread in. Drizzly day, February 4th. Our camp is on the border of a little lake, out of which we use water and which abounds with frogs. The frogs keep up such a croaking as to prevent us from sleeping at night until we got used to them. The pines grow up tall and straight about camp. There is no undergrowth, the ground being covered with wiregrass, a very pleasant place to bivouac. The Malish moved away this morning, and Coleman and I got some of their boards to make us a shelter. The judge away on detail. We made a very good shebang. This concludes the 16th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.